Hello, Emeralds and Echidnas. My name is Tibius Guy, and there's a third episode of Sonic Mania Adventures out, so you know what that means. That means I am going to be spending an inordinately a long amount of time gushing and frame by framing my way through a very short piece of animation. And the reason I'm doing that is because I love, as you indeed will know if you've watched any of the previous videos about Sonic Mania Adventures, I love the animation style on display. I love the ways in which they're communicating character with no dialogue whatsoever, only through motion. I love the methods that you're using to achieve it. I love the simplicity. I love the fun. I love the comedy. I just adore it. I think it's wonderful, and I'm so happy that it exists. So, this episode is called And Knuckles because it's part 3, and it's a joke. It's a meme because there was a game that had the title with the thing. So, the star of the show here is Knuckles, and his particular relationship to the Master Emerald, which he's trying to protect. So, how does the short go about telling us what Knuckles' personality is like without ever using a single word to express to us that he's the guardian of the Master Emerald and it's his sacred duty and this is the thing he cares most about and he will do anything to protect it from anyone who could possibly get in his way, but he's also a little bit dim-witted and a little bit easy to trick and get around because he's so single-minded and obsessed with protecting this one thing that he sometimes forgets to think through any other aspects of life? Well, it begins like this. See what happens there. This very short introduction gives us a strong hint about the relationship between the Echidna and the Emerald. He starts out putting the Emerald down with like the most suspicious, like, any all y'all try and touch my Emerald, like even a little bit, I will kick your ass. Like that's the expression, that's the body language that he's got going on. And right at the moment when he starts to relax about it, when he goes, okay, nobody here is going to try and steal my Emerald, something happens. Something goes past. He doesn't know what it is, but anything he hears, anything that might happen, causes him to go instantly into, I must protect the Emerald mode. Right? And this very short sequence has then already given us some information about the character, that he's attached to the Emerald, that he's very protective of the Emerald, and that all of his thoughts revolve around who might steal the Emerald. This is the primary thing about him. And a lot of that expression is, what I really like about Knuckles especially, is that a hell of a lot of the expression of his character, his personality, comes through the eyes. Take a note what happens when the flying squirrel guy, I can't remember what he's called, flies past in the background. Is it Ray, the flying squirrel, and Mighty the armadillo? I think that's what it is. There. That's how they choose to express his... Oh, he's paying attention. And that makes sense also from a characterization standpoint, that a character who's supposed to be a watchman, who's supposed to be looking out for something, guarding something, expresses a lot of who they are through their eyes. From a pure characterization standpoint, that makes sense as well. And this is also something that happens as he's... Take a note how, as he's having these thoughts about Sonic, Eggman, and the Master Evil Robot guy, take a look at what his eyes do. First, his one eye opens a bit and starts looking up at his own thoughts. Then the eyes open a little bit more, and then the whole face opens up. The eyes was like, oh, Sonic, I hate that guy especially. And here, after this lovely little motion... By the way, smear frames, once again, one of the most wonderful things about these animation shorts is how they use smear frames. So take a look at what happens when he jumps up. And again, as we've talked about before, the smear frame's function is to help smooth a motion that would otherwise... Because all there really is 1, 2, 3, 4 frames. That's how long his jump up there takes, is 4 frames of animation. But the smear frame helps smooth the process out. It makes it looks a lot smoother, a lot more nice than theoretically it really is. And take a look at, this is something you only really notice this stuff when you're looking in between frames, but Knuckles' model breaks a little bit here as his hair settles back into place. Some odd stuff happens with him, so it's almost like he's made of rubber. But again, it's the eyes that communicate to us exactly what's going on here. He thinks, holy shit, something or someone, perhaps Sonic, is near. This is his reaction, like, mine, I am Knuckles, my Emerald, Like, that's his expression, is like this, this is the only thing I care about in the entire world. This is the only thing that matters to me. And again, the eyes are doing the majority of the expression. Like, there's not that much body language going on. It's not like he's kind of clutching to it nail and claw or something like that. It's just, he's just kind of hugging it, but all of the expression comes through in his eyes and in that little line that he's got for his mouth, and these lovely little smears. And again, you can see how every time they want to move the eyeball, they do an animation smear. And it's only 1, 2, 3 frames, 1, 2, 3 frames, 1, 2, 3 frames in order for each movement to happen, but because they're using the smear frames, it looks really smooth in motion. See? But once again, it's the eyes that are doing the majority of his expressiveness, a majority of the talking for the character. It's also worth noting that Knuckles is decidedly, in all of his movements, a lot heavier than Sonic or Tails are. If you notice, like, if you remember back to the previous 2 episodes where we talked about how Sonic moves, in every single shot that Sonic is in ever, he's gonna do bouncy shit. Like, he's gonna behave like a spring. He's gonna be jumping up and down, and when he lands, he usually bounces back. But this is not so much the case for Knuckles, who's much more heavy in the way that he's animated. He doesn't really bounce. He doesn't really jiggle too much. He just kind of, he jumps up, grabs the leaves, and then comes down like he's attached, has weights attached to his feet. And that's also part of the expression of this character, is that he's not really someone who makes a lot of superfluous movement. He's not really someone who moves around too much. And that stoicism that comes across in his body language, where he really doesn't make any excessive movements, is part of why the eyes are so necessary to communicate the character, because they do the heavy emotional lifting that his body language really isn't that interested in showing. Well, his eyes and his mouth. I love the way they gave him shark teeth to indicate aggression, to indicate that he's a more aggressive character, to indicate that he's also more emotionally invested than other characters might be. And again, see here, as he's standing still looking out for enemies, he doesn't rotate himself. He doesn't turn around looking for them, like going, whoo, one side, whoo, one side. He just does the little flick around with his eyes, because, again, Knuckles is about not making too many unnecessary motions. And so we have Ray the Flying Squirrel. I think that's correct. Sonic fans, feel free to bring me up on that. And you see a much different philosophy of movement. And again, the eyes are doing the grunt work for Knuckles' expressiveness here. There's not much body language going on. It's just a tiny little shift in how his head is turned, where his eyeballs are pointed, and that little eyebrow lowering. He doesn't even change his expression on his mouth. But Ray, look at how he moves. He doesn't land just like boom. He lands, then he rolls, and then finally he bounces up, and then he slowly glides gently down to the ground. Because again, he's a flying squirrel. A lot of his character motion is about flying and gliding, so they're communicating that even when it's like all he needs to do here is land in front of Knuckles, but they give him all these extra little, because he's this lightweight little flying squirrel. He comes down, he rolls around, he bounces up into the air, and then he gently flutters down to the ground finally, and gives a little bow, and then presents himself with, you know, a raised hand and, hello partner, I'm Ray the Flying Squirrel, I'm here to be your new best friend. To which Knuckles reacts wonderfully. And again, take a look at how Knuckles reacts as Ray comes down. Take a look at his face and his eyes, how he follows him. He doesn't really turn that much in order to follow where this dude is going. He just kind of follows him with his eyes. And even here, again, as Ray is doing his introductions, Knuckles' face, his eyes in particular, are doing the majority of his expressiveness. And contrast that with how Ray is animated, because he emotes with his entire body. He moves his arms around, and it's up, and it's down, and then he's raising a finger, and then he's bowing and showing the thing. His body language is much more active, where Knuckles is much more laconic and kind of calm. And it's only when Knuckles gets agitated by someone perhaps being too close to the emerald, and again, notice how the eye, boink, that one again. This is exactly the same thing he did when Ray appeared on screen the first time. Boink. And that's a repeated motion. That's a repeated gesture that the character, when you have that for a character, when you have some repeated gesture that they do in response to something consistently over and over again, that becomes part of their characterization. That becomes kind of a visual trademark for the character, something by which you can identify who they are, how they feel. And it also makes them feel really consistent. Like if you're doing your own character animation and you can give your character a little visual quirk like that, like with Knuckles opening one eye when he notices that something is wrong, keep those in mind. Like, write that shit down and keep it consistent, because that's a great point of characterization. It's a great way to make the character feel more organic. Like, they have quirks, they have personality things, they have little tells, they have little tics that happen to them pretty consistently. I just love the expression. It's so good, like the way that they've given Knuckles so much facial expression going on. And also, again, here, see, what happens here is Knuckles looks at him and he's shocked, right? And with any other character being shocked like that, you can see he kind of raises up a little bit in his boots, and his quills kind of do the Studio Ghibli thing of starting to move in response to his emotional stimulation, but his feet stay planted like lead on the ground. His posture doesn't move at all. And again, for a character like Sonic, for a character like Tails, or indeed Eggman, when they're surprised like that, they will absolutely kick their legs around and move, but Knuckles doesn't, because he's heavy, because he's planted on the ground. And here comes one of the best. And also the sound effects in this particular segment of the animated short are just lovely, because there's this particular episode of the short, all of them do, but this particular episode of the shorts uses a lot of in-game sounds to communicate various different things, as well as a squeaky toy noise when Knuckles puts his hands on the side of Ray's face. And notice how Ray reacts, by the way. It's just a lovely little piece of character animation, because you can see here very subtly, as he's looking at the emerald, you can see, look at his eyes, how his eyes are drawing slightly more together. As he's focusing more and more on the emerald right in front of him, the eyes get closer and closer. And then as Knuckles grabs him, look what happens. Boom. They go out of focus again. And that, from an acting perspective, that's such a clever, subtle little thing that tells us something about where Ray's attention is. Right now, his attention is 100% on the emerald. And right now it's, oh, something just grabbed the sides of my head. And off he goes. And again, you can see this happening here again. Knuckles is focused on one thing. He's mostly interested in one thing. Something else happens, boom, and the eyes make the entire transition. And more smear frames. This is one of the only times we really see Knuckles make a lot of active movement. And what does he move around? Well, the emerald. Once again, we're reestablishing that Knuckles is focused and entirely about protecting the Master Emerald as a character. We reestablish this because we're about to make a joke out of it, as he notices a bunch of badniks turning up. And this is where Knuckles finally gets to be in action. Like, this is where he finally gets to let loose. And take a look at how that's expressed. I love these action poses. Like, this is just a good, like, there's a very limited budget on these things, and there's a very limited amount of animation you can do, so you can't have the big epic, you know, One Punch Man fight scene going on. So they're using some techniques that were developed especially for anime, like especially well used in anime, and these are, like, this flash shot here, this effect, and stuff like these motionless frames that happen just after the punch has landed, where the background is doing the majority of the motion. You can see all kinds of things are happening in the background, but the characters themselves are still images. These are cost-cutting measures. That's how they were first developed, especially by Eastern animation studios. We need a scene here that communicates a lot of action and power and speed, but we have got a budget of like $5 and 2 sheets of paper left to do the animation. How the hell do we make this fit? And one of the cost-cutting measures they came up with was communicating power by doing this. Essentially, it's bullet time, as it were. It's a moment of slow motion after a big event has taken place, where everything else just slows down and you get to take in the full impact of what has happened. And that's just communicated with absolutely minimum motion. And you can see it here again, also, like Knuckles' punch as he punches the head off. How many frames of animation are there? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5, pretty much 5. And then the head gets like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. But it gets a lot more frames of animation, but it rapidly just turns into a gray smear that just kind of rotates around. And this is in terms of doing small animation productions, all of this is a lesson in some of the techniques that have been developed for doing a cool action scene when you don't have the budget to do a cool action scene, to make one happen anyway. And some of the things they take advantage of is the use of camera angles. You can see the first punch that he lands comes from a relatively... because we start from here. We need Knuckles to close the gap to the machines that he's fighting. So what do? Well, we give a clear frame showing him moving forward. Like he's clearly dashed towards them, landed a punch on one of them to break them, and then the next thing he does, he turns around and he smacks the other one in the face. And again, these flash frames are just so nicely designed. A really good flash frame can really help sell the impact. But there's a clear progression in how Knuckles approaches the fight, right? There's one punch where he's charging towards one. The second punch is where he's clearly whirled around, like he's swung around and punched the other one into the ground. And then finally, he's on the ground and he punches the head off the final one. And I love his expression here. Look at this. That's fucking terrifying. And it's a great fight scene achieved with absolutely minimal means. And it's just, I love looking at stuff like this because, again, the background is really doing the heavy lifting in terms of communicating speed here. Because if you take a look at just the animation of this punch, barely anything happens. This is it. It's almost like he kind of lifts the head off the robot rather than punching it, right? But because we have the background, which is just constantly in motion, all these speed lines just boiling on the screen, essentially, you get this sensation that a lot of motion has taken place. And again, watch how Knuckles lands. Red smear down, and then he just stands up. He doesn't bounce. He doesn't really recover from the fight in any super meaningful way. He just kind of stands there. And again, we're remembering to communicate how heavy, how planted Knuckles is in comparison to other characters. And once again, that same little affectation. He's in a moment of, I dealt with these thugs, and then he notices something with one eye open, which he then reacts to. And I love the smear frames in this thing. Have a look see what they do here as Knuckles enters the frame. Stretching like rubber. All of it in the service of just getting a quick transition for him to get into the frame. And again, there's not a lot of frantic movement with him. Like, the only things he's moving is really his face and his hand and looking for the Master Emerald under a rock. Just out of sheer desperation, which is lovely. And finally, we get to see him really doing... Emeralds, give me back! You can see him just kind of chasing after and kind of cursing at the plane. But again, as he chases after the plane, even though he's kind of swinging his arms and stuff, he's not jumping. He's still planted to the ground. He's still heavy. He's still not really airborne. In the same way that a character like Sonic or Tails would be. And it's just... I just love how... the people who animated this thought this through. They thought about how do we communicate the character's personality, how do we distinguish them from each other, because it's so easy when you're working with cartoony characters like this to just kind of design them all from the same template of motion, which is to say, make them all bouncy. I mean, they're all pretty bouncy in the game. They all do jumps, they all do spin attacks and fly up into the air and stuff, so it would be very easy to just communicate all of them with the same sort of visual communication of how that character's relationship to their body is, what kind of body they have. But there's some real thought that's been put into expressing visually, without ever saying a word, without ever needing to do anything, exactly how heavy is this character, how do these characters, how do their temperament come across in their behavior, because you don't need to see much from Ray here to realize that he's essentially a counterpart to Tails. He's this happy-go-lucky, friendly fellow who's here to make friends, but he's also out on a quest. He's looking for a dude, and he's tremendously curious and might get in trouble over his curiosity. And all of that, again, is communicated just with character motion, just with a little bit of acting, and with really very few resources in terms of how many frames of animation are available per second of this thing. I'm tremendously impressed by these shorts. I love them because it's something that goes to show that if you want to have a good cinematic for your video game, like if you want to have a good piece of animation communicating some story, communicating a character, introducing people to who they are, you don't need like a massive production with like 500 people on staff and a live orchestra and there's like 15 voice actors and an epic plot. You really only need some people who understand who these characters are, a relatively modest budget for an animation production, and, well, a couple of minutes of animation per episode to show off who is this character, what do they want, how do they relate to the world, how do they relate to themselves, what kind of stories do they get involved with. Excuse me, it's been full of pollen today. It's really all you need, and I think that's a good lesson, that it's not really how many resources you put into a thing that matter, it's how well you execute on the fundamental things that make animation of all kinds interesting. And that for characters, that's always the character animation, it's the personality, it's how you express someone's inner life through their outer behavior, how you give life to animate things. That's the thing that matters. It's not about big budgets, it's not about cool action scenes with lots of frames and you know, 15 minutes of punching and dodging and punching and dodging and punching and dodging and powering up and powering down and reversals of fortune and all that. It's just about using the minimal that you need, doing it well, and getting across the character's personality. And this is something these shorts have done so fantastically well. I look forward to the next one, which I will undoubtedly also talk about for like more than 20 minutes. But for now, thank you so very much for watching, and thank you for watching through to the end, as I assume you have since you're here, because most people don't skip to the end screen of a video, because that's not usually the interesting bit. I mean, maybe you did. I don't know. I'm not the boss of you. Anyway, if you want to, if you are so inclined, you can head on over to Patreon and support this channel with any $1 a month. If you have $1 a month that you would be willing to throw my way, that would be incredibly helpful for making rent and having food and other things like electricity. But if not, that's of course completely 100% okay. If you want to subscribe, there's a button for that down below somewhere. You can also hit the bell, which I think you're supposed to do nowadays if you want to actually subscribe to something and not just pretend to be subscribed to something. You can hit the like button if you want to, and there's also a dislike button, but I just have to warn you that it's guarded by a small angry forest animal with spikes on its fists, and it punches everything that even tries to touch the dislike button. So unless you're like an evil genius with plans of world domination for which you need the 7 chaos dislike buttons or something like that, I would recommend against pressing it. But I mean, maybe you are. Maybe you are an evil genius who needs dislike buttons to do a thing. I don't know. Evil genius is a weird man. Thank you very much for watching.